Thank you everyone for joining us today on this IMPACT EdTech info session on the Funding Box Continuity Day. I'm Lucy, I'm a project manager in Funding Box, and today we have a panel of two experts in education and education technologies, and we're talking about how EdTech can support schools in being better prepared to remote schooling. So our goal today is to see how the adoption of technology in schools can be beneficial for them, especially in these times of COVID and lockdown, and how EdTech startups can be a big role here. So first, quickly introduce the IMPACT EdTech project, then I will give the floor to our two panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll start the panel discussion. If you want to interact with us, you can use the questions tool of the GoToWebinar panel, and I will also include your question in the discussion. So yeah, we can go maybe to the next slide, Maria. Okay, so just to introduce quickly the IMPACT EdTech project. It's a partnership of 3 partners in Europe. The coordinator is European Schoolnet. Tommaso, one of our panelists, is working there. They're actually a network of education ministries throughout Europe. Then we have ISDI, represented today by Kshanshu. They're a specialist in acceleration methodology for startups. And Funding Box, where I work, and we're specialists in open call management and cascade funding. Yeah, so the objective of the project is to establish the Startup Incubator Accelerator. Throughout the 3 years of the project, we will help 42 startups to bring their digital learning solution into the market. And this will be done through 3 open calls. So the first one was launched in April and will close now in June 30. You can find all the information on the website, impactedtech.eu. And then we're launching soon in July an exceptional remote schooling open call. So this is for more mature companies that have a solution that could be fastly implemented in school to support them through lockdown. And then we'll have a third one that will be opening in 2021, which all information will also be published on our channels. Yeah, so I want to tell you just a little bit more about this call that we're launching now in July. It's open for SMEs and startups, so only SMEs and startups are eligible from EU countries and AH 2020 associated countries. TRL 729, so quite mature solutions, and I have to answer to one of the 4 challenges that we have identified that schools need during these COVID times. So ensure pedagogical continuity when kids have to be locked down at home, inclusive remote schooling, so yeah, namely for kids with special needs, personalized learning, so how can you implement teaching that is personalized to each student's needs when you don't see them, and digital skills development, of course, is needed to be able to use the EdTech solution both for teachers and for learners. Yes, so you can find all the information on the links that are showing now on the screen. If you have any questions, you can contact us at contact@impactedtech.eu. And yes, stay updated on our channels. We will give more information about this remote schooling open call. And yes, for now, I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves before we start. Maybe Kshanshu, I see you already have your camera on. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about your background before we start the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy, for the introduction. So I'm Xianshu I work for ISDI and also the project manager from the ISDI side for IMPACT EdTech. So our main responsibility is to deliver the acceleration services for the startups that we selected during the program and work them through all the way to help them solve the business challenges within the 9 months of time with us. And we will also have delivered different kinds of go-to-market strategy and connect startups with interested fundraisers so generally to help them grow their business within the program. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tommaso?
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, and hello everybody for who's following us. So my name is Tommaso, and I've been working for European Schoolnet for about 8 years now. So as Lucy was mentioning, the organization is a network of 4 ministries of education across Europe. So we try to make our contribution for making sure that education is evolving, is innovating, and is actually preparing our students for the 21st century. We're glad to be in the IMPACT EdTech project as well, and we cover more the educational part, trying to see what's the contribution of the teachers and the experts can be in this process.
Thank you, Tommaso. I would start by a first question actually for you, Tommaso, because I know you've been working in education and also in the adoption of technologies by teachers and school for a long time now, I think around 10 years. So how do you think this recent lockdown affected the adoption of EdTech by teachers and pupils?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a very complex, of course, issue and matter, but this is the time to make that reflection and to make that thought in a way become a reality. So it's early to have figures or evidence on what has evolved in the perception of EdTech in learners and teachers, but there are some considerations that we can already make, especially if we start from understanding really what happened. So we had a general lockdown that, of course, forced also schools in about 190 countries worldwide to close down, and that affected more than 1 billion learners across the globe. So this was, of course, unprecedented in the scale and in the urgency in which this happened, and therefore we had this enormous pool of learners and teachers that had to move to a digital environment. They had to use educational technology, they had to find out what that could do for them, and then they had to face also little or bigger challenges that they would have encountered in the process. So I think this time really exposed the potentials of educational technology, and that's certainly will have an impact in the sense that pupils, students, teachers that never used maybe digital technology for education, they started doing so because they had to, because that was a necessity. They definitely, I think for many of them, the experience was above the expectations. There was a lot of skepticism at the beginning. Then because of the policies, because of the measures put in place, I think many of those were overcome. On the other side, of course, there was challenges that couldn't be met by technology itself. So definitely there's an increased awareness, I would say, about the potentials of educational technology. And I think people are not forgetting that EdTech is really what permitted some continuity in the learning of the students. So that's a taken, that's a given. What is not clear yet is what will remain of this afterwards. So, but definitely we know that teachers are taking into account what they learned a lot during this period. Students definitely evolved and developed a different understanding and awareness of how much of themselves they have to invest into their learning through these platforms as well. And then we saw also for policymakers and families also how much their contribution is needed. So I would say in a word, EdTech will have to prove in a way from what learned now that it can give something to the education sector on top of what is there already. But of course, it's important also to say that the presential, the face-to-face teaching and learning must continue, must be a priority, and that was a clear outcome of this emergency remote teaching as well.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Tommaso. I think what was interesting also that you said they were forced. So it's also interesting to see that the startups that are providing solution got interesting feedback, I think, from this forced situation in which everyone had to use their solution. So Kshanshu, you're a specialist in the acceleration program for startups. So I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a bit more about the IMPACT Acceleration Program. And as we were talking about how the solution can be adapted to schools and their needs. How do you make sure that the accelerated startups are adapted to the teacher needs and the pupils' needs?
Yeah, thank you, Lucy, for the question. Sure, I think the whole idea about how to leverage the different kinds of EdTech startup disruptor solutions to help the schools and teachers to weather this crisis, this lockdown, is actually based on our firm belief in the power of startups-driven social impact. Because we are fully believed that instead of like handing over the solutions directly to schools, it is much better for the startups to have this opportunity to leverage the disruptive solutions they have, and in that way they will like grow together hand in hand with the schools. For example, if we have the startups selected from our programs to be able to do a pilot directly with the schools in need, so actually they are in this process all together hand in hand, and this they will have the opportunity to teach and to train the schools and teachers to, and also in the meanwhile for the teachers it's good for them to be able to use this new technology, and for the startups it's also a very firm proof of concept for them. So this is the general idea. So regarding what is the acceleration program looks like, that is also our I forgot to tell all of you that in the introduction, that's actually EC Accelerator. We have a standard and very functioning acceleration methodology that is highly customized for the startups' needs in their period of time of this acceleration and short after. So we highly focused on where the startups are in that stage when they join with us, and what are their business challenges in the relatively 6 months to 9 months of time, which is the range of time that we'll be able to be there with them and grow and work with them like every step of the way. So our methodology is firmly based on understanding the business case of the startup, so in order to make sure that all our mentoring services and acceleration services are highly fit with the startup's needs, we begin our acceleration program by analyzing deeply the startup business by their feasibility study and their feasibility plan. We also will have a survey that is to collecting data of the 10 aspects of the startup's needs, and then some challenges like some qualitative questions. Sorry for the noise. Some qualitative questions will be gathered through the one-to-one call that we normally do with startups. So once we know the real needs, the business needs of the startups, and we will start out our mentor hunt. Because the core value of the acceleration program is to be able to have a mentor that is to guide the startups in during the process, to follow up, to identify the biggest challenge and the biggest milestone the startup wants to achieve with us within the program, and then to follow up every step of the way. So we measure the whole process. So when we have this matched up mentor, which is fitting with the startup's needs, and we already identified in first phase, so we will find this mentor with the right expertise for the startup, and then we will have them to design a business plan altogether for this acceleration. So you will have like one big goal that you want to achieve with the acceleration, and then that will be break out into different KPIs and different milestones to keep track of every step of the way. So in that process, it's a progressive process, and we will also accompany the whole situation, the whole following up with specialized mentors. So those are the mentors that will help you to improve and to have deeper help in some specialized areas such as marketing, legal advice, cybersecurity, etc. To make sure that you won't have any specialized or specific block along the while your business grow in the process. So this is the whole methodology behind. Of course, the end of it is that we'll evaluate that if you accomplished what you wanted to accomplish in the very beginning, and we will also look for the startups to evaluate the services and mentors, etc. So luckily that we always launch very satisfying programs. The average satisfaction rates from startups to our mentors are about like 9.2 out of 10. So most of them are highly satisfied with the whole services, and many of them also quoted that many of the mentors or the fundraising help they have actually give them very important connections for them to land investment, something like that.
Thank you so much, Shanshu. I hope it's interesting for the SMEs that are listening to us. So you see now, you know a bit more about the Impact Acceleration Program. How does it work? And so you see that it's not only funding, as you can see on the information on the open call on our website. It's not only funding, but it's also a whole acceleration methodology that's provided. And as Shanshu said, it goes hand in hand with the teachers. There are pilots in schools, so it's really also focused on the actual needs of schools. And another thing that we have in the Impact EdTech project, which is brought to us by EUN, so represented by Tommaso here, is the Future Classroom Lab, which is based in Brussels. And it's, well, Tommaso will tell us a bit more, but it's a lab in which people can test new technologies, but also new pedagogical methodologies, etc. So I think it would be really interesting, Tommaso, if you could tell us a bit more about this. I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you.
Me neither. I cannot either.
No, we cannot hear. And in the meantime, I would like to remind the audience that you can ask your questions in the questions tab. And also I had a question whether the recording will be available. And yes, it will be on our YouTube channel, which you can access through our website. And Tommaso? Yeah, we still cannot hear you, which is very strange because we could at the beginning. But I'll move to Kshanshu in the meantime, which was a question actually meant for both of you. But yeah, so as we talked at the beginning, that the lockdown.
Yes, with pleasure. In fact, what you mentioned, both of you just now, it's so.
I think Thomas left, but his voice stays.
Let me just Thomas,
are you here?
I'll try to stop. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, Thomas, so we can. Yes, can you tell us a bit more about the Future Classroom Lab?
You're showing on the camera. Is it? Yes. You'll be able to hear me now. Yeah, what I was mentioning is that, of course, it's very important what you both mentioned. So in the education sector in which we have, I think, the privilege to work in, it's very important to make schools, teachers, headmasters feel that they are not alone, so that they can learn from other similar situations that were addressed with technology, and that they could learn from other peers and teachers and partners, also from the private sector. So that's why we set up this Future Classroom Lab, which is a physical space in Brussels where we experiment with innovative learning environments, with innovative pedagogies, and with EdTech. In that space and in that community, we have the chance really to have the private and the public sector dialogue and understand from each other what are the potentials and opportunities offered by the technological developments and what are the needs that students and teachers need to address. So this is more than a physical space, so is a community. So it counts more than 150 similar labs that have been inspired and open across Europe, and it has a network and a community of teachers, of policymakers, both national and local, that contribute to this constant dialogue. And in fact, when we run validation pilots with the startups, with the companies, bigger or smaller, those would be, then there's always an engagement of this community into this process, because this is the kind of peer learning platform where innovation can not only happen, but can travel well and be replicated across different countries and different contexts. So that's in a nutshell what it is about.
Great, thank you, Tommaso. And just to tell you also for all the SMEs that are listening, that in our first open call and third open call, in the second phase, so the acceleration phase, the selected SMEs will have access to this future classroom lab. And I have a question from the audience for Tommaso. I think maybe it's a bit early still to answer this, but I will ask you anyway. Which educational tools were more successful during the quarantine? Have some others proved to be better than others?
It is early to say, possibly. So we don't have evidence about which tools were better. We saw that, of course, some platforms for remote learning, well, let's say platform for what we call also virtual learning environment or digital learning environment, those were very popular, of course. I think that was because teachers and schools needed to have a digital space where they could organize the work of the students, have a certain control on, in a way, some kind of formative assessment of what students were able to follow and understand, and where they were mostly struggling, because of course, lacking the physical, the direct face-to-face contact, that was very important. And so I think that's really what proved especially helpful in these months, on top of the obvious, of course, virtual communication tools that were, of course, very much used.
Yes, yes. I will ask you one last question to both of you before we conclude. Yeah, do you think this lockdown that we lived, will bring more technology in schools in the coming years? So not necessarily in case of another lockdown, because this will be forced, of course, but do you think this will lead to more blended learning, more use of digital tools in the classroom, etc.? Maybe Kshanshu first.
Yeah, sure. I think this is definitely an opportunity for schools, even the schools that like more traditional schools stick to more traditional methods, getting exposed to different kind of blended learning methods. And I think this blended learning method is going to persist even when this crisis ends.
And Tommaso?
Yes, I agree. Of course, there was a lot of exposure and experimentation being done by both learners and teachers. So and that definitely brought some positive change into the perception of educational technology. There was also some investment that was made towards accessibility and equity, because of course the access to devices, hardware, software, licenses, infrastructure, internet connections was very diverse among different households, families. So that uncovered in a way deeply also sometimes that there were differences among different pupils and learners. So some effort was done at country level to leverage that out, to try to raise the conditions that students would have to work and study. And then I think overall, I think there's more effort and emphasis on digitalization in all sectors of society. So of course, education would have a component of that, keeping in mind that face-to-face and presential learning, it's essential for especially younger students.
Yes, of course. Thanks a lot, Tommaso. I would also like to remind all the audience that we did an info day, a virtual info day about the challenges of remote learning, which was really interesting, and which we talked about also the adoption by teachers, the backlash that it can happen when being forced to use the technology, how to overcome this backlash, the solutions that were used by teachers. So if you're also interested to continue the discussion, because we have to stop now, unfortunately, you can check on our YouTube channel, and this was also a great discussion that we had that day. If you're interested in the open course, you can check our website, impactedtech.eu. You would see the information about the open course that's running now, which will close on the 30th of June, and the open call, which will be launched in July, which will be much more focused on solutions helping schools during lockdown, which is called Remote Schooling Open Call. And this is all for now. I will also like to tell you that the Funding Box Continuity Day continues. In 10 minutes, we have another session on tips on how to close an investment deal after COVID. We'll put the link in the chat for everyone. And yes, I will conclude now. Thank you very much, Shanshu, and thank you very much, Tommaso, for your time and for this really interesting discussion. And yes, I look forward to other discussions with you and other stakeholders. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Anytime. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.